Hi, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about the importance and the benefit of space. Now, space has many different aspects. There is a space that can be found outside, outer space, space between things, the space between sounds, and also inner space, the space between thoughts, the space between our emotions, even the space that we have in between our sensations. And at first, when we start to do some meditation, some praying, or just some sitting silently, we sometimes can have an experience of this space. It can be something that we describe as very calm, peaceful, possibly even compassionate. We sometimes are moved to tears when we suddenly experience this silent space. Astronauts, when they have gone to outer space, look at the Earth, turn back towards the Earth, and oftentimes describe feeling this space, this inner silence, the ultimate experience of space. And so we can see in our daily lives how hard, how difficult this space is to feel in our lives. How we don't actually feel the space-like nature of things. We're oftentimes distracted, oftentimes fixated to our list of things to do, or even just the jarring sounds, the jarring sights, the jarring news stories of our days can cause us to be consistently distracted. And in this distraction, we feel almost like a rag doll, pulled from one to another, to another, to another. What is space for such a moment? What is space in such a life, really? And maybe for us, what we find to be that space is a glass of wine after a long day, or the time that we finally get to lay our heads on a pillow. Finally, there is some peace. Finally, there is some space. And so, what I want to talk to you about today is that this space, even though it can be very hard for us to see, is actually something that is intrinsic, even in the moments that we are distracted, even in the moments where we are whipped around like a rag doll in our lives, which in this day and age is generally all the time. So how can we access this peaceful space? So the great masters of the East and the West have described various meditation techniques. Oh, you have to run off to the mountains somewhere, or you need to go find a space, a solitary space, to actually finally calm your mind down. Now, this is a luxury for many of us, and so not something that we can go out and get access to very quickly. Maybe a weekend here, a weekend there, we'll find a few minutes to find maybe a meditation cushion, maybe a moment of peace. For the rest of us, though, it's all the time. We won't have any peace. We're just going to be distracted and caught up. So, what do we do then? How do we experience this space all the time? How do we also access this nature of space? Not only the inner space between thoughts, but the outer space of this world. How do we access that? And also, what are the benefits to accessing that? Is there really a point? So first of all, how to access it all the time. Really, the most important thing is to be able to look directly at whatever is occurring in your mind. We oftentimes have a very strong habit of burying, and what that burying is actually a not looking directly at the pains, annoyances, and distractions of our lives. And I'm not talking about outward looking. We're oftentimes outward looking and being distracted by outward appearances all the time. But what I'm talking about is inward looking. How does this make us feel? How does this make us experience the world? What thoughts are these appearances outside of us making us think? And what is this inner monologue at all? So at the very first step, as we're going through our days, is to have an inner eye, looking at what this is all about. What am I feeling when I'm getting distracted? Is there a tightness? Is there a frustration? Is there annoyances? And then just looking directly at the annoyance itself, the distraction itself inside our minds. As we start to do this, we'll actually notice almost like a bubble, a soap bubble, it pops when we look directly at it. When we look directly at our experiences inside our minds, they go away very quickly. And then oftentimes the next distraction arises just as quickly. But there's some sort of relief, some sort of space that can be found when we look directly and in some ways confrontationally with the thoughts, feelings that we have about our worlds that arise within our minds. We look directly at them, and instead of running and burying, we face it head on, almost as if to say, so what? And in that so what, the feeling has a chance to dissolve. And in that dissolution, finally we can find space. Now, this is a practice that we can do all the time. This is something that we can do and test out throughout our lives. Because as we go throughout our distracted lives, we are constantly encumbered by all sorts of distractions. And this is really the time when, if we look directly at them, they have a chance to dissolve. If we don't, on the other hand, and this kind of gets into some of the benefits, if we don't look at those thoughts and feelings that arise when we mostly are uncomfortable, but also sometimes are fixated to something that we really like, when we don't look at those feelings and thoughts directly, what ends up happening is that they end up accumulating like snow or like garbage in our minds. And then they're not ever really dealt with. And then we bury them. It's almost like we're a garbage compactor. We bury them deep, deep down into a subconscious, potentially, if you believe in such a thing. And then what happens is, because we don't ever really look directly at them, they can come out in pretty dysfunctional ways, in the form of latent anxieties, beliefs about certain people and places and things, fears, anger, and all the other afflictive emotions that we have described in these little video series that we've been doing. Also, even the more pleasant ones, if we really like something and we don't ever really look at the way that it makes us feel when we get the something that we're after, we also will keep on being fixated to, again, getting that hit, for example. So if, for me, I really like coffee and tea. So if I never actually looked at the nature of the caffeine boost in my mind, I didn't say, oh, that's a sensation. and that makes me feel good, and then look directly at that good feeling. I don't do that and see that it's actually space, it's nature, dissolves into space. If I don't do that, what ends up happening is the fixation to my caffeine addiction just increases and increases and increases, and I can't go a day without coffee, for example. But if I see that it's actually space by looking directly at the feeling that caffeine gives me, then its nature as just like a bubble popping and that peaceful state will then be able to start to permeate outward. And I can see that actually it has nothing to do with the caffeine at all. It has nothing to do with the coffee or the tea, because everything actually has this same nature of space. And so first, we can start to see the benefits in our own lives directly in looking at our feelings and thoughts, being suspicious of them, but also looking directly at them and seeing their nature of space, which then also tells us that it's not the whole story. Furthermore, some of us have inner monologues, and that comes from something that in various traditions they call the ego, but the self is another word. We are constantly having an inner story of what we want for the self and what we fear for the self. And again, if we look directly at the self, when it starts to peek its head in these forms of thoughts and feelings about what it wants and what it doesn't want, when we start to look directly at it, then we again learn that it is no different than these other thoughts and feelings. It, like a bubble, just bursts and is like space. Then we can begin to have control over our inner worlds, because we are directing the gaze of our minds at all of these inner fixations, feelings, and thoughts, as well as the self, and they dissolve by us looking directly at them with, again, a bit of a confrontational vibe. Not an angry vibe, but a vibe that is very straightforward. I'm looking right at you, self, and now the self has no ability to continue talking about all of the things that it wants and things that it fears about the future or the present or whatever it is. Once we gain that kind of control over our thoughts and feelings, where this awareness, if you will, starts to gaze directly at our thoughts and feelings, and they dissolve into their nature of space, then we start to also recognize that our sensations and all of the appearances around us, what we would normally call the material world, also might actually have a nature of space. Now, quantum theorists these days, as well as relativity can barely say relativity fanatics, physicists, have said that everything is energy. Its nature isn't even material. The quantum folks talk about it being probabilistic, and also having a relationship with an observer. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these theories, but what I'm going to say is that it seems like physicists are starting to get involved in a little bit of a mental process, where they are starting to believe that everything is space in its essence, energy in space. But we don't think of things that way in our normal lives. And because we don't think of things this way in our normal lives, we are caught up in, again, the same types of fixations that I was mentioning that we can see so very clearly internally in our inner worlds. So if we actually start to see, once that our inner worlds are empty or space-like, then we start to look externally and we start to see that this, outside of ourselves, all things are just our sensations, for example. If they're just coming in through our sense doorways, as it can be described, our five senses, or even if you have a sixth sense, everything's coming in through the senses. So if you actually see it that way, you can start to be able to let go of even the strict material nature of the external world, which, again, what's the benefit of that, you might ask? The benefit of that is that you can let go. You can feel so much more peace when, again, the material-looking world around you starts to be antagonistic to this self that we've already described as having a nature like space. If the external world and the internal world and the self have the nature of space, then there actually isn't any antagonism to be found. It's just in our minds, in our heads. We have just gotten into a strong habit of viewing things in this antagonistic way. Once we shed that view of the self, the view of a strictly material world, both inner and outer, then what we end up seeing is a great peace, the peace of all things, the peaceful nature that is actually present, non-material, but also appearing material. And in this way, we can immediately feel open, free, at peace with whatever is occurring in our mind's eyes. Now, that's the objective, right? We're not there yet. So in the meantime, what we can do is we can look directly at all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, as well as the outer world, and with a mind that's wise and remembers this is space. Transient, the material elements are transient, and its nature is actually just space. In this way, if we remember that, then we can let go of all of the things that encumber us and also pacify our mental worlds so that we have absolutely no anxiety. We're at rest all the time in our minds, in our hearts, and no matter what happens around us, no matter what kind of situations we're thrown into, we only feel at peace. Doesn't that sound wonderful? So take a look at your mind. Take a look first at your feelings about things and start to look directly at your feelings. Directly means right at the feeling itself. What we oftentimes do is shun that feeling. We say, "Oh, I'm a little uncomfortable," right? I have a pain. But in your mind, look directly at the pain and you'll see it blink. You'll see it disappear. Maybe just for a second at first, but keep looking. Keep looking. And if you have a really hard time with this and you almost feel resentful or upset at me mentioning even this practice, another way to get out of this modality is to think about someone you love instead of your pain. Look directly at your pain or directly at your discomfort feeling or whatever that feeling is that is causing you some stress. Look directly at it and then think of someone that you love and benefiting them. What you will find is that 1-2 almost punch that you're doing entirely eradicates your pain. Again, momentarily, but it will eventually take hold with more and more practice until things are like the way I described, where everything is like space. Thank you so much. And I'm wishing you all the very, very best, that you find something in these words that is helpful in your personal practice, that's helpful in your daily lives, where you don't feel like you have to give everything up and you feel like you can live your life as it is right now, but in a way that you feel much more open, free, and happy going forward. Thank you.